if you're in the right place, is Roots and Connections, and our presenter is Sarah Apedaile. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. And we're going to say peekaboo around this post. So, for those of you who were not paying attention in the little panel discussion thing, I just want to start by reminding you of what we are talking about here. One little definition. Multicultural is the presence of multiple cultures in a space. And intercultural space, so when I talk about it, we're talking about where cultures come together. And the definition of inclusion that we're starting to play with in the Center for Intercultural Education at NorQuest is inclusion equals diversity plus engagement. So I think that a lot of the things that we are talking about with respect to essential skills and how to help people get up to a level if they're lacking in some essential skills or whatever, essential skills are the things that help people engage. And so when you have essential skills, you are able to engage. In a space that has different cultures coming together, we add that having an intercultural perspective also supports the engagement of everyone in that space. So I'm going to be using those terms today. All right, so we're going to start with a little contexting exercise. I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, and in about 30 seconds, I would like you to plan a party. Okay? So the Chamber of Commerce has generously agreed to fund anything. Anything. So money is no object. Thank you very much to the president of the Chamber. So there's a rule. There's a rule. Don't start at this. Everybody needs a party. The rule for this is that as you listen to your partner's ideas, any idea that your partner gives you, you need to respond with yes, but. Okay? Now please go ahead, you have 30 seconds or a minute to plan your party. Go ahead, yes, but. Our planning time is over. Planning time's over. Jim, how'd that go?
Awesome.
Awesome. If you work in a yes but atmosphere, he's your guy. Okay, so now I want you to do the same thing, but I would like you to respond to your partner's suggestions with yes and. Okay? So again, you have about a minute. So your partner suggests something, you go yes and. Okay? You have about a minute. Okay. Don't worry, no kissing. All right, so there was a little bit more energy in that. How did that go compared to the first one? Well, first of all, the cost of the party, which one is going to be more expensive? The second one. More ideas, etc., etc. So, yes, and I also like to say that our online group, they were also participating in this, and there were lots and lots of things coming across as you were doing that exercise. So that's very cool. They would like beer. Oh. Beer. Actually, one can comment on that too. So as you approach, that's the approach I would like you to take with this resource of Roots and Connections. Roots and Connections is not the answer to all things that ail. It's a resource that I invite you, just like if you were in the Essential Skills workshop before lunch, to take it and say, yes, and how can I use this with the people I work with? What is in here for me? So I think that our natural tendency, maybe it's an Alberta culture thing, that we like to break down things into how many problems can we find, and how many challenges and barriers can we identify. And so I'd like you to look at this as a yes and kind of thing. All right, so today what I would like to do is just run through a PowerPoint slide that goes through the resource to give you sort of an orientation to it. After I do that, I'm going to ask you to think about what kind of questions you have in relation to what your context is. And then we'll go in the second half. I'll try to respond to some of your questions by going online and looking at the resource. I also have, for the people present here today, the resource has 4 pieces. They're very pretty, I think. And I've put them on your table. So you have 1 or 2 pieces of the resource on your table for you to look at as we go through. All right. So first of all, to acknowledge some of the people who are involved in this. So Alberta Employment and Immigration, which is now Alberta Human Services, funded this project. And the project actually ended about, I don't know, it seems like forever ago, maybe 4 years ago. We piloted the resource in 4 communities. Before that, we did some research by going out into communities and finding out what the needs. So our research in the Rural ESL Enhancement Project came up with a response. We wanted to come up with a response to some of the challenges that immigration, see that challenge focus. So what were the things that we discovered? Well, there's isolation for some newcomers, especially women, seniors who are coming with their partners perhaps, who have come and moved to communities to work. There's a need for community cultural awareness. When you've got a large influx of people who are significantly different culturally to the people who are already in a community, that results in a oh no kind of a feeling. And there was a lot of tension, and the differences caused trouble for people. And then around Alberta is a Welcoming Communities initiative, and many communities around Alberta were signing on to the Welcoming Communities initiative, and they wanted to know how to actually act on this. So more than say, we want to be a welcoming community, what can we do? So in trying to build on things that were already happening, this resource came about. So this is probably not new information, but this is what we discovered as the things that cause isolation. So isolation, obviously in rural communities, geographic separation can cause isolation, but there are all sorts of different types of isolation. And if you look at this list, and you think of the 9 essential skills, for example, you could probably link up which essential skills would be a priority in order to overcome some of this isolation factors. The resource is built on certain principles. So the first one is that when newcomers come into a community, they are looked at as eventually, as they integrate into the community, to become participating and contributing members of that community. Not a little workforce who lives on the outskirts of town and comes in and does jobs and then goes back home, but basically remains separate from the community, but as members of the community. The second is that because this is funded as essentially as a language resource, it needed to follow and build on what we as language instructors across Canada use as our foundation, the Canadian language benchmarks. So it's the Canadian language benchmarks, and the methodology of language teaching comes from what this Canadian language benchmarks say are good. Adult learning principles, and then the fourth one, intercultural communication. So when I was first asked to come up with a project proposal, I remember being asked, okay, so there's people who are isolated, and we have language resources, but could you do something language and intercultural something? So we wanted to, the vision was to integrate intercultural communication into the language training resource. So this is what we came up with. At the center of this, we see that there is a focus on capacity building. So within communities, can communities build up the knowledge, the skills, the capacity to offer services in intercultural spaces? The resource is built so that if you have nobody to help you, you can read through it and sort of train yourself. So there's an instructor guide, there's a planning guide, there's a curriculum, and there's a toolkit. It also is capacity building in the sense that for community adult learning councils, for example, if you have a group of volunteers that you would like to train, you can use this as a training process, as a workshop. So it's designed so that people can pick it up and use it, and as you use it, you develop more and more knowledge and skills about language teaching, about intercultural communication, about building social capital. So ESL is obviously one of the main parts of it. So if you are unfamiliar with language training practice and methodology, it's okay. You're not going to become an expert in it by using this, but it's designed so that if you follow the curriculum as it is, you will hit the main parts of how we understand that adults learn another language. And so you can be confident in the design that it's addressing the pieces that you need. So what we found in our research was that people will, well, this is nothing new. People teach like they like to learn. And so that can lead to imbalances. People are teaching what they assume other people need to know, which might not necessarily be the case. And going on an intuitive, in an intuitive way, you might miss something. So I had one instructor who believed that she had to teach only grammar, or not grammar, vocabulary. And her belief, her language teaching and learning belief was that if you didn't have vocabulary, then you couldn't really do anything with the language. And as language instructors, we understand that it's much more than that. The second piece of this is the community orientation. So welcoming communities. We know that there's people in the community in which newcomers are coming into, and we don't know, as community members, if I'm a community member, I don't know how to interact. And as a Canadian, I know that my cultural normal is I don't want to offend people. That's a pretty common thing I hear. I don't want to offend, and so what do I do so that I don't offend somebody? I stay away from them. So I avoid interacting. So in this curriculum, there are pieces that, and this sounds kind of funny, but it really works, that gives people permission to interact with each other. And once that permission has been granted, then it seems to flow naturally. So the facilitator of the course is using their networks, is creating opportunities for community members to be involved in the class or the one-on-one or whatever. And that's around social capital building. A nice story is I was in one community and there was this young man from the Sudan, and he was very tall, as some of the young men from the Sudan are, who have come to Canada. Very, very tall, very slender, very, very dark skin. And this was really a surprise for many of the people that he was encountering in a seniors community that he wanted to do some work in. So for them, this was really different, and they were afraid of that difference. And he wanted to volunteer with Meals on Wheels to deliver meals. And basically, this community of seniors said, no, we don't want him. We don't trust him, or whatever. They were overwhelmed by the difference. So one of the other people who had worked as a volunteer for Meals on Wheels for many, many years knew the people in the community, knew this young man, was able to vouch for him, essentially, make the connection, which after that developed into a beautiful set of friendships and relationships. So that one longtime volunteer was able to use his social capital to create a link between the fellow who wanted to volunteer, who was very different from the people in the community, and then he's doing very well now. And then the third part is the culturally integrated. And in this morning session, I talked about how this is related to, there's 4 different things that the role of a cultural bridge does. Within the curriculum, there are all sorts of informational pieces about the gap between cultures, or how people make sense of things from different value orientations. So you can learn, for example, in healthcare, how somebody from a very different cultural orientation might perceive or understand the system as it is presented to them here. And so it gives us, if you are Canadian who has the dominant culture, for example, you have the privilege of never having to sort of articulate your cultural values to make sense of things, because everything makes sense. The system works, everything makes sense. And so in intercultural spaces, you need to start examining those things from a Canadian pattern perspective, and that can be difficult. It can be difficult to recognize the patterns if everything works according to what you would expect. So there's tools, and those are called culture bites in there, B-Y-T-E-S. I know culture doesn't bite. Somebody said, oh, people are going to think that's what it means, but I haven't found that. So this is the thing that I said that is a nice takeaway, even if you're not a language instructor. You're not going to be using this in a language teaching or a cultural orientation type thing. It's thinking about, in any instructional space, that there are multiple roles that you're fulfilling when that instructional space is happening in an intercultural space. So first of all, as an EAL instructor, you need to know certain things about language teaching and language learning, etc. Those are incorporated. The cultural bridge, the 4 things, if you remember from before, is to be able to anticipate. So if you know about what kinds of things that are grown out of, let's say, a Canadian, for lack of a more specific definition, a Canadian cultural pattern, and you know that workers from the Philippines that their cultural pattern is like this, you can anticipate what kinds of things are not going to make sense in the same way. So as an anticipator. And you can build your cultural knowledge to figure out what kinds of things might fit into that category. The next that is related is how to ask questions. So when you have cultural knowledge, you can ask more specific questions of people, of their experience, to get more specific information back. Because just as I, as a Canadian dominant culture person, I'm not accustomed to having to explain what my cultural values are. I know what they are a lot more because I've lived overseas for many years of my life, and they were in direct contrast to the places I was at. But if I stay here, and I never had my way of doing things contrasted to another one, I don't necessarily know how to explain it. Same thing for somebody moving to Canada who has come directly from a monocultural context. They don't necessarily know how to explain the cultural values that are influencing their decisions. The next thing is as a bridge, so helping to bridge the gap between how one person is perceiving things and how the Canadian, let's say the Canadian normal is. And then the other one is the absorbing. Being able to understand what a transition experience is like for newcomers and being able to name aspects of it, being able to normalize it, this goes a very long way in supporting the cultural transitions that people are experiencing when they move to a new culture. And then the community connector, there's lots of things that are built in as resources to help the person using this resource to do this. You know, coffee encounters, there's community maps, there's information sheets to pass out to community members who will be community facilitators, giving them tips on how to present to a limited English proficiency group of people, for example. So there's some education going out to people in the community in that way. All right, so I'm just going to go through the 4 pieces very quickly. But before I do that, based on that and what we did in the morning, I'd just like you to talk around your tables and talk about what draws you to this session, what some of the questions are, or the way you're orienting yourself and your interest in a resource like this. And just talk to each other. And you can jot them down. There's some cards on your table, and you also have a pad of paper with your folder package. So just take about 5 minutes, talk to each other, gather some ideas, and then when I go through the rest of the PowerPoint presentation showing the different parts of the resource, we're going to come back to that list, and you're going to write down any more questions you have, and I'm going to get my colleague Karen to help me sort them out, and then we'll go to the next session from there. So just talk to each other about what is your interest in this, what questions do you have, why have you come to this session. So again, try to get to kind of learn my role and but now I'm the other part of what we how to use the tool. How do you do it? Yeah. So what does what do they represent? What will they help me? What am I? And how is she going to be helpful? And how do I use that? good word.
Yeah.
Kind of
So,
nice.
if you'd like to recommend it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll give you a minute before I do the answer. I was trying to put my feet off. And mine is very similar too, because I'm new at the real room. So I've heard about but more my understanding is more in the technology, like testing, supporting, so I have a lot of gaps. So I know that but absolutely. So I want to be able to get bases with something that see that this is an important tool. And I've gone through the manual and I just want to hear from the horses now. Yeah, you know, the relic, and that's kind of the go back to right. I know it's not how do you write down now? What are the yeah. Like more awareness of how to integrate and we go to that and continue that. So I know the answer is what we're seeing with that. Is there anyone else that should be all now that we've had a taste of it, that atmosphere. And also your family.
Okay, so it sounds like some good conversation. We're letting her happen.
No, we take it really in depth. Yeah. So now it's like, can we write the paragraph and we check like 3 or 4 words? And the other the availability. So, you know, like the online and kind of the somewhere for you to do Oh, I did that.
Okay. All right, thank you everyone. And we've also got a nice conversation going online that we'll share. So now that you have those questions and those ideas from each other right in the front, we'll go on and I'll go through each of the resources. And hopefully that's going to generate a few more questions as we go along. But before I do that, I realize I should probably define how I'm using the word culture for anybody get too nervous about it. So I use a very simple definition, very common metaphor used to define culture, and that is of the iceberg, that there are more things underneath than, I'm going to turn it to the camera here, that you can't see than that you can see. And so when we're talking about cultural awareness, we're getting to know what's underneath our own iceberg. What are our values and beliefs and norms? And it's these things underneath here that inform what we make up here and how we behave. And in intercultural spaces, guess what is the thing that causes the most problems for people? Not the object. It's the other one. It's the behaviors. You don't use the right amount of eye contact. Immediately, that's interpreted or perceived and given meaning according to these rules that we have underneath here. And so the more aware one is of one's own rules and how they link to what we consider to be correct behavior in whichever context that may be, the more we're able to navigate intercultural spaces effectively, which we call intercultural competence. So the other thing that's important to know about this, the definition I use of culture and intercultural communication is that we're talking about a group level of analysis. We're not talking about personality, because within any cultural group, there is a range of personalities, and we use cultural generalizations. So we can use generalizations because we have recognized patterns. When you see a pattern that exists within a group, then we can say, aha, that's probably cultural. Then we hold that lightly and we go into that group and we find out if that's true for the larger group. So when I say Canadian culture, what I mean is the patterns that everybody, and we're talking about a bell curve, so those people kind of in the middle, not the deviants. The deviants are different. But the patterns that you see that people, generally speaking, who are Canadian, who live and work or who were raised in Canada have some patterned, shared characteristics, values, beliefs. That's what we're calling Canadian culture. So there's lots of levels of culture, right, within that. There's a culture in Alberta, there's a culture in my workplace. But when we're talking about culture, the difference between culture and diversity is the difference among us. And diversity exists in Canada and it exists in Afghanistan. But the cultural patterns, the culture that it exists in, makes sense of those different aspects of diversity and the rules around them in different ways. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm defining culture and making a differentiation from diversity. Because we're just kind of using culture and diversity and Canadian culture. Many Canadians say, well, we don't have a culture in Canada. But actually, we do. If you start to look down here, there's a lot of things that are patterned characteristics that if you went and worked in Israel for a year with a group of Canadians, you'd still see what was Canadian and what was not Canadian. Okay? So it's a bit harder to see. We don't have necessarily those objects that are really clearly Canadian, like those buildings or a kind of style of dress that is different from Europeans. Well, Europeans tend to be dressed here. I don't know if that's true. Maybe that's because Canadians are more informal. There's a value around informality. Anyways, I digress. But that's the definition of culture that I'm using. Very simple one. If it happens at a group level, that's what we're talking about. Culture, there's things you can see, there's things you can't see, cultural awareness, learning what you can't see about yourself, naming it. Just like with essential skills, intercultural communication seeks to create a shared language. So you can have a shared language to talk about the stuff that you can't see. All right. So, the different tools. The first one, and as some of our colleagues online have pointed out, in small communities, as more and more newcomers come in, and remember this project was done in the context of small Alberta communities. It doesn't mean that it's not relevant to a large community, it's just that in a large community like an urban center like Edmonton, we have people to do different things. In small communities, we don't. So people who were not necessarily involved in providing language training or settlement type things were suddenly doing that as a part of their offering. So a lot of literacy providers, literacy programs expanded into language programs. Or maybe they never had a program. So a planning guide to help step by step go through what are some of the things you should think about, and planning through a cultural lens. So what are some of the considerations in planning steps that might have a cultural perspective that you should consider? Okay, that's the planning guide. And so there's all sorts of suggestions and ideas and step-by-step type things that for experienced program coordinators, they do this. But if one is not an experienced program coordinator, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes to put together something. Then there's the instructor guide. So the instructor guide is what I was talking about before that could just be used as your workshop planning guide. So if you're going to do a training session with volunteers and instructors, then just give them the instructor guide and use that as the workshop and go through it. So stage one, this is something that is also part of the capacity building. We've put in the instructor guide a set of 3 self-assessments based on the 3 roles. The 3 roles being the language instructor, the cultural bridge, and the community connector. And the assessment tool is done using a personal perception indicator methodology that comes out of the University of Chicago. Very cool methodology, I think. So you have a statement, and then you rate your knowledge about that on 1 to 5. You rate your experience with that, and then you rate your confidence. So the example that they use is, like, for example, changing a tire. I might know how to change a tire because I've read the handbook, but I've never done it before, so my experience is 0, and I'm not really sure if I were in that position whether or not I could do it successfully, so I have a low score for confidence. So the way this can work is that before I teach, before I tutor using the Roots and Connections materials, I can fill out a self-assessment, see where I am. And then afterwards, because it's supposed to be sort of a capacity building tool, you're supposed to learn things as you go along, reassess at the end and see if you have shifted. A nice way to measure for yourself that you're getting something out of doing it. Many people do volunteer work, tutoring work as an opportunity to give back and also to learn something. That shows you what the things are that you would be expected to know perhaps for each of those roles. And then it goes through curriculum components and facilitation steps. For example, the first step to assess, frame, build, reflect, connect, and then what do I do on the first day they're actually coming, or I'm actually going to meet my students for the first time. There are tools, etc., in the toolkit for all of those. In the toolkit, there are planning resources and there are instructor resources for each of the 3 roles. And then in the curriculum itself, so like I was saying this morning, people will say, well, this doesn't look a lot different from any linked curriculum. And yeah, this is not anything new. Safety, community, health, and well, these are all very common content here that people need to know and want to know. And we got this list of things from doing our research and asking newcomer groups in the communities where we did our research. What are the things? What are your priorities? And this is what they said. Now, the number one, getting to know you, this relates to setting up the self-development component of the curriculum. So in this, for example, we do identity wheels. So an identity wheel is put my name in the middle, and then I put what are the different aspects of my identity. And you can do this, what was my identity at home in my first country? What is it now in Canada? And you can see how now you could set up a space to recognize and acknowledge what the difference is, what has been lost, what has been gained, the feelings, the stuff that goes along with that. And it's very powerful. So one of our volunteer instructors, she said, when I first saw this, because in the pilot, I said, everybody has to do Unit 1. And she kind of rolled her eyes and thought, ugh, getting to know you, we have to do that again. And then she realized how valuable it was. Because the way it's structured, it enables people to name important aspects of themselves, to be seen, have those validated, to share them with other people, because they've been isolated, and some of the people who were in the pilot had never had an opportunity to talk about the loss, the change, the transition, who they were. Here I am in Canada, and I can't speak English well, but I was a really successful marketing professional before I came here. So being able to put words to that, be seen for that, etc., was very powerful. So that's a nice unit, and it's a unit that could be used in the beginning of any kind of group coming together, not just Roots and Connections. Any class that comes together for the first time could use that. So the features of the ESL component of the curriculum, there's outcomes to help guide where you're going. There's Canadian language benchmark outcomes. The curriculum is benchmarked at benchmark 1 to 3. There are components of it that are always used. So it's a repetitive process. Sometimes we think that we have to come up with something new every time we meet, a new activity, a new something. But actually there's a lot of comfort in having a process that's the same. Okay, now we're going to be doing class dictionary. The words I'm adding to it are new, but I know what to do now. Whenever I see class dictionary, I know what to do. Survival English, you always do the same kind of thing. The dialogue practice, using numbers, so there's a numeracy component. And you can see how these, even though this is not mapped to essential skills, I can easily see how we could take it there. And illustration. So on your table, I put an example of the illustration. So you can download these. What I've done with them is laminated it on hard, sort of a hard, stiff laminate. And then I can write with whiteboard markers, erasable markers, and erase. And if you're in a temporary classroom, like you're meeting here or you're meeting there, these things can go up at the beginning of the class. Oh, we've done this unit, we've done this unit. You can decorate your class using what you studied. So it's a nice, teachers wanted something that they could touch and use. So we came up with these. A local artist in Edmonton drew these for me, and I was trying to get at the sort of the Where's Wally kind of thing. So the pictures with lots of detail, with lots of things to look for, lots of things to name. And we, when developing these illustrations, we tried to follow the guidelines, and I'm sorry, the name slipped my mind. I think Tracy Derwing's group did it at the U of A on how to use images for ESL learning in ways that are appropriate and useful. So these are things that are meant to be usable, and I'm sure that you could come up with a lot of different ways to play with these.
You're just going to hold it out here in the camera. So everybody can get, and I kneel down. Great. Just so they get a little bit of a visual about what you're talking about. Okay. All right. That's good. Thank you.
So there's an example of the illustration. This illustration here on your right is a picture of the community mapping activity. Love this activity because if it's done in the way it was designed, as learners and tutors or instructors engage each other over the course of time, they build a map and they build themselves into the community. So you can start with a nice big blank piece of paper, is how I envision it, and you draw the community, and then you place yourself into it. And I think it's a very powerful kind of a metaphor of building yourself into a space and showing how you belong to that space. And allows for the artists in the group to come out, and for those who claim not to be artists to have some fun too. So the culture features, the culture bites. So the culture bites are designed to talk about general values around a particular subject area. And they go to what is similar for all individuals. So this relates to our intercultural development continuum, that I won't go into. But the way it's described in the beginning is what is similar for everybody around this, in health, whatever. And then what are some of the important differences that can make a difference if you think about a large cultural distance. So cultural distance is, like I said this morning, kind of the psychological distance that needs to be bridged between my first culture and my new culture. So for example, the cultural distance between the United States and Canada, maybe like this, if the United States was here, and then the United States, and I'll use Afghanistan because our host, I think his first culture is Afghanistan, is significantly further away. So the way people make sense of things and have structured everything around them is quite a bit different. There's a different sort of root, because religion is different. So just the way things are, the deep roots of the culture are different. So that's cultural distance. The culture bites try to bring one of the areas that's in the curriculum, like health or renting an apartment, I don't even remember what they are now, from a large cultural distance perspective. And then there's the personal connection activities, which are a regular activity that you can do. That's actually a Venn diagram exercise where you take any topic, and the one in the instructor guide, that's the example, is having a baby. I think I was working with the multicultural health brokers a lot at that time. If you know them, they got started around helping new women who are new to Canada, help support them when they were having babies in Canada. It was pretty scary for some of them. So you have in Culture A, having a baby. What's it like? For example, you go into the hospital, you have a single or double room, you go in when you start to feel the contractions. In 24 hours, you go home and a nurse comes and visits you, and you take your baby to the mall, for everybody, even when they're only a week old. Okay, I'm exaggerating. But in Canada, Canadian women will take their babies outside, for example. And then in Culture B, you have to make a reservation for the hospital a long time in advance. You need to, your family members bring in the food for you, you have to pay for it. You stay for at least a week, and then you stay in your home for at least a month. 40 days. 40 days at home. And people wait on you hand and foot. Yeah. And then you go home, and I was carrying my daughter around in the laundry basket as I took the laundry out. Today is the laundry. Because we didn't have any extended family around. Would you have extended family to help you? Back home, that would be it. I'm not here. You carry a baby in the laundry basket. So there's opportunities to look at what's different, my normal, your normal. And I don't have to be a Canadian cultural expert to describe my experience in Canada. I just have to have an experience. This is my normal, and then the other person, this is their normal. And these are the things that are different about our experience. And then what brings people together is when we discover what we have in common. So when we can discover that we have things in common, then that tall Sudanese man who just was completely different, and I absolutely have no idea how to interact with him. Then we suddenly find out, oh, he has a 14-year-old son too. Oh, he likes to play field hockey while I like to play ice hockey. He's a botanist. Oh, me too, I love to garden. So things like that. When you find things in common, it helps bring people together. So these sorts of things are built in to the curriculum, and they're all based on the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. What are sort of appropriate things at different stages of development? Community connections. I've already talked about community mapping. I just love the idea. I was introduced to the idea from the multicultural health brokers who were doing mapping of a different sort. Community mapping is a really neat idea. For those of you who are not familiar with it, there's examples of community maps in BC where they map out all of the fruit trees in an area. And then if I don't want the apples from my tree, they can be harvested by somebody who does want them. And then we know what our community resources are through our map. So the same thing goes for a community map in this case. I can put on, as I go through the different units, we add those components to the map. And we add the people that we meet. We add our favorite places. What's your favorite place in this town? So you belong to this town, but you have a favorite place. That sense of belonging and connection is important. There's the illustrations, which are community activity-based. You can talk about how is this similar to the same thing in your first community. Have you lived in 2 or 3 different communities in Alberta? How is it similar? How is it different? What is new? What are some things you've never heard of before? And then there's the community connections activity. So for example, we have something called a community facilitator. You go out, you ask the local hockey coach or a teacher at the school to be a community facilitator. You give them a sheet that tells them what it is. They come to your group or you go to them and they give a presentation. And it's an opportunity to meet someone in the community who is offering something that might be of use to you, the soccer coach, the school principal. And it builds connections, or the pharmacist. So this has worked really nicely. The students in the class, they go and they learn about the pharmacy. Pharmacists do a lot of stuff in Canada. Like, wow, what a great resource they are. A lot of people don't know that, even in Canada, what a great resource a pharmacist is. And a pharmacist is a really important community member and a place where people come and they know stuff about you. So I, as a new person in this community, I've met the pharmacist. I go in, he or she might not remember my name, but they recognize my face. So what's the difference when you go into a place and they go, oh, as opposed to another client, I don't know you. So I learned this from my grandmother who moved from Quebec to Alberta after my grandfather died. And she said, I finally feel like I belong, Sarah, because when I go to the grocery store or to the bank, people know my name and they recognize me. Yeah, that is a feeling of belonging. You don't have to remember my name necessarily, but when you recognize me, I feel like I belong. All right. So this resource is free to download. Our NorQuest site requires 2 essential skills. So we're working on it. So this is how you would get to the location. We also have some print copies, which you see on your table. We made up a few print copies for those who just wanted to have the colored copy. And so they print them out. It costs us that much, so that's how much they are. But if you want to print it on your own, they print nicely in black and white. You download it to a USB, take it to wherever, probably about $40 to print it out. So now, having gone through all of that, I'd like you to go back to your groups and come up with questions or ideas, things that are ruminating. And then Karen is going to help me to collect them. Karen Link, who is our regional steward manager, person extraordinaire. And then we'll go forward from there. Sarah. Yeah. Sarah. Yeah. Oh, so the task is in the first session, or the first part when you came together, you were talking about why this interests you. So now, continuing on from that, what kind of questions come up for you around this? How might you get and let's see introduction. I'm going to help yes. And afterwards we're going to go online and also right. We can just hand it off to like a computer. Yeah. Okay, like I think that's what it's great. As I was through it, I can slowly I'd love to hear more about my life.
Yes, it is. I have not. I do. Yeah, most of the time. I go into the office for and also yeah. No, actually, you know, like, kind of related to this, I kind of have thoughts here. Maybe your perspective is great. This whole community is quite, yeah, I actually support that. You know, where, yeah, what I'm hearing is that that people are aware that they're disordered, and we also know that so I'm thinking like would would that change what sort of roles reconnection for community management? Back in the day, I developed one picture of things to think about before we get into so have you thought about is that makes things I had a really good thought. But it's true, and I think what is love? And for some communities where, for example, with cat clubs, you're well established, has exponential challenge, try to use type of group in that community. So for you, it's not, even though you're coming on in the community, you still have support to it. Some people walk into this position and leave a little awareness of their community. That really, I wanted to grab. I was like, oh, we just have this book. The one that grabs the book and I want to look at, what is it? That is something I think that they're going to be so in other words, make sure you don't get that. I'm good. Sounds good. Actually, have so there's people also in that. Got charged. NorQuest went through the branding. And so it took after the beginning of January when we got smart. And everywhere Christmas, we like cats and yeah, oh, that's so horrible. I found a couple of holes. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for all of your questions. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to two of my colleagues from NorQuest, one who is still putting on her shoes. Well, actually, I'll let them introduce themselves. And then I'll put my shoes on. Karen has compiled all of the questions, and Bart's going to answer them. Oh, I forgot. Okay, so Bart, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself, and then Karen, and then you can start it out.
Hi, my name is Bart Huskins, and I am the Rural Roots Manager, Project Manager. Just a real quick about Rural Roots. We provide ESL support to practitioners and instructors and volunteer tutors throughout Alberta. And so I will just leave it at that. I do have business cards, and I will be around afterwards to answer any questions.
My name is Karen Link. Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Senior Manager for what we call Regional Stewardship at NorQuest College. And there are 9 regions in Alberta that have been carved up into areas where community colleges help support adult education in the region. So the Edmonton region goes from Whitecourt down to Camrose and Drayton Valley out to Thornhill. We have 23 communities, including 8 or 9 First Nations communities. So those are the communities that we try to serve. So we're very interested in supporting the communities and ensuring that their ESL needs are met.
And Amelia has graciously offered to help navigate. So I'm just going to show you how to navigate our website to get to these resources. So this is what you would get if you put in norquest.ca. And you go to the NorQuest Centers, and this is on the last slide in your handout. NorQuest Centers. Then you go to the Center for Intercultural Education. We have 2 centers. And intercultural resources for educators and trainers. It's a long way to go. Anyways, if you scroll down here, all of these resources are all of our intercultural resources, and they're all available for free download and free use. There's a lot of interesting things on there. So if you go back the other way to Roots and Connections, scroll down the second one. Okay, you click on the picture, and you get another page with lots of text in it, and you get your 4 or your 5 resources are right here. So whichever one you want to click on, and we'll wait. See what kind of question come up. Right, so Karen has kindly the questions and we'll see. I'll give them to you or to Bart. You can pick whichever one you think would be a minute. All right. Let's see. Okay. So what I tried to do is I tried to read through everyone's questions and sort of make sense and group them together. We probably have a few more than we have time for, but I'm interested. There's a fair amount of interest in how the toolkits can help cultures explore each other. So if you have different cultural groups together, does it lend itself well for doing that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. So those examples that I gave you, like the cultural identity wheel, that's a way of structuring a conversation. The Venn diagram, which is part of each curriculum unit. Actually, why don't we go to this one? It's not done. This one? Yep. So, I think you have to go down to download the resource. So there's some of the things that are built in, like those process tools, like the Instructor, the identity wheel, and the Venn diagrams, the personal connections. Those are structured to help structure a conversation. The other thing is that you have the culture bites and the illustrations, which can generate conversation pieces. So what is similar and what is different? That's a nice way to start. And then the other way to have a conversation is, what's the upside of your normal? And what's the downside? What's the upside of my normal? What's the downside? And so these things are, and then maybe we'll want to minimize it a bit. And these are things that are built into every lesson. So yeah, the intercultural space is when there are different cultures communicating together. It's not necessarily the Canadian something and the newcomer to Canada's culture. It can be whatever.
Sarah, just a quick question on the history. The 4 pilot communities were which ones?
The pilot was run in Edson, and Vera Calvert is here today if you wanted to talk to her about it. Edson, Provost, Claire's Home, and McLeod, Fort McLeod, and Grand Prairie.
And how were those chosen?
They were chosen. Did I put that one in? They were chosen. We had some criteria, and we sent out invitations to participate, and communities sent in an interest, and then we selected them according to certain criteria. And all of that is available in the report if you're interested in knowing how we did that.
Okay. There's a number of questions around how it's actually used. So, for example, in an urban setting, have we tried it yet in a larger urban setting? And if we haven't, how are you imagining it might work? And how might facilitators or who might partner on that? Will it be partners with immigrant serving agencies or not? Or
that sounds like a funding question. Well, I'll tell you how. Basically, it could be used anywhere. Because it's designed for a small community, it has to be, all inclusive, really. But there's no reason why these topics don't relate to people who are in large communities. Now, the images of people on wagons with sails and a dance is going to be a different thing than you might see in an urban setting. So there will be some differences that way. The way that I have seen it being used a lot is with church groups who are running ESL programs in their churches. There are organizations like like a cultural group organization, say the Ukrainian-Canadian organization, who is running language classes for new immigrants from the Ukraine. They are using it, and really that was one of the objectives that Alberta Human Services had. They know that there's a lot of grassroots offerings of language training, and they wanted to provide some tools so that there could be a certain, kind of like a quality control. Get the message out to organizations, grassroots organizations, that there are organizing things like the CLDs, for example, the Canadian Language Benchmarks, that we use to organize and help people learn language and measure it. So those are some of the urban settings that have been using it.
So Barb's going to interject with her question now.
Yeah, I would say that the good segue to this is that my question is, what is the difference between Roots and Connections and the Rural Roots Initiative? So Sarah gave you a good example of what Roots and Connection can be used for, and the Rural Roots Initiative is about providing that support in the community. So we don't work with your learners. Instead, we work with you and your tutors to support you. And we have 2 types of services. We have professional development workshops that we can come out and support you with, from pronunciation to what is ESL to multi-level classrooms. And then we have the other side, which is more of a mentorship. So, for example, I'm going to pick on Pat here. She may say, I have this bookshelf full of resources, and I don't know if they're relevant anymore. Or I need to figure out what's the best use with this group of people. So that's the sort of stuff that we do. And so that's where we can incorporate and say, hey, Roots and Connections is a really great resource because here are some activities or sources that you can find.
And some of the consultants, I don't know if all of them, but some of them can come into your organization and do a training on how to use Roots and Connections.
And then one last thing, sorry, that I didn't mention is that Rural Roots is a provincial initiative. So NorQuest is our host, but there's no boundaries for us.
Okay. So some of the questions were around training and how do you support trainers. But one of them was on how you recruit. The word that was used was coaches, but I imagine could be like facilitators or like, how are people recruiting?